Shiv, the Shiv, my God. I have no words for this finale besides heartbreaking, right? It could have been you. Famous last words. And they orchestrated that finale perfectly. And they've been doing this since the beginning of the season with this tension between Tom and Shiv. And talk about the start of a beautiful, real relationship. I think Shiv was going to back Ken before she realized Tom would be CEO. And before she saw Ken with his feet up on Logan's desk. She was like, this is too much. It's a no for me. This was a chance for her to secure her future with her new family because her old one is done. There is no uncertainty about what Logan wanted. He wanted to take the money and get out. He had no intention of making any of his kids CEO. He said it. You are not serious people. Basically saying you're not cut out for this. You don't have the brains. You don't have the stamina. Like, no. And their father unfortunately left a legacy of abuse and neglect. And he told them all what they needed to hear to keep control of them. And it didn't really matter who he said it to first, last, second, third. All that mattered is that it meant something to them. And this attempt to take the company back, it was always hollow, right? It was a way of satisfying their own egos, proving to Logan that they were worthy. You know, they didn't like Lucas, so they wanted to get back at him. Like, the whole thing just, it never really made any sense. And the last shot of Shiv placing her hand on Tom's, but refusing to lock palms with him. I mean, these are not two people coming together because they love each other, right? These are two people coming together because they need each other. Shiv was reduced to the wife of a CEO when just a few hours before she was going to become CEO. Like, that is a wild ending. That is some crazy writing. And I think a lot of what Shiv had to say to Ken in that room, a lot of it she was saying to herself, right? It's not all about you. You're not the most important one here. Like, she has to think about her future, right? Is she really going to go to bat for people that wanted nothing to do with her, right? They grabbed that crown and they shut her out. And watching Ken unravel was unbelievable, right? Pinning Roman against the wall, blocking Shiv. I was like, sir, you have become totally unhinged. He basically became his father. Like, he used manipulation, intimidation, violence. He was willing to do anything to secure his position. And, you know, there's a saying like, tell me what a person wants and I'll tell you who they are. Ken wanted power for power's sake, and he continuously crossed these lines. You know, we saw it in that election episode. We saw it in Living Plus, right? He was willing to put words in his father's mouth to make it seem like this thing was more valuable than it was. And we saw it at the end of the season when he lied about the waiter. And the title of the episode, actually, With Open Eyes, refers to the poem Dream Song 29 by John Barrymore, a contemporary of Sylvia Plath, who was tormented by the death of his father, who shot himself when Barrymore was 12. Berryman himself would later jump to his own death off the Washington Avenue Bridge in Minnesota, 1972. The first part of this poem reads, "There sat down once a thing on Henry's heart, so heavy if he had 100 years and more, and weeping, sleepless in all them time, Henry could not make good." Basically, Ken could not make good. He was so close, but yet so far. And I felt by the end of the episode, there was really no coming back for him. He was done, right? He has no reason to live. And he wanted so badly to become this man he thinks his father wanted him to be. He sold his soul. He sold his family. He crossed so many lines. And it seems like he was willing to just keep crossing them. And by the end of this episode, you know, his blinders are off and he's come to the realization that he's become this man that he doesn't really like, all for nothing. So the episode starts off and it seems like the deal is good to go. They want to block it. If they want to block it, they're going to have to do it themselves. And Ken's optimism at the start of the episode is a bit jarring because basically everyone is like, why are you trying to block this? This thing is secure. Take the money and go. But, you know, Ken really believes that it's his destiny to become CEO, and this is his last chance to do so. And I don't think anyone thought in a million years that it was going to be Tom, especially Shiv. At the start, she's with Lucas, and Lucas, he's not too happy with Shiv, right? We see that there's a magazine cover basically implying that Shiv is the puppeteer and Lucas is the puppet. And he says that he's not bothered by it, but he clearly is bothered by it as the episode goes on. And Lucas's decision to appoint Tom really is because he's not looking for a partner, right? He's looking for someone that he can control. The more he hears about Tom, the more perfect he seems, right? Like, he seems to have this reputation of just eating as much as possible, which is exactly what Lucas is looking for. Lucas does test Tom, right, in that kind of weird job interview. Like, that was one of the best scenes in this whole, episode. And Tom passes the test, right? Lucas is literally sitting there saying, I want to F your wife. And he's bothered. You can see that Tom is visibly bothered, but he goes along with it. And he goes along with it. And I think the moment that Tom was able to convince Lucas is when he basically was like, listen, I'm a grinder. I'm a grinder because I worry day and night about my bodily safety. I don't know if what's true today will be true tomorrow. Like, he's basically just in tension all the time. And he makes it clear, like, I was built for this job. If you're looking for someone to take pain, if you're looking for a punching bag, like, I am your man. And that's exactly what Lucas is looking for. Like, he is tired of Shiv's ideas. He is tired of her brainstorming. And what's unfortunate is the only reason that he's kept her around is because he wants to sleep with her. He never actually really respected her, which is an interesting commentary on, it's a man's world, and unfortunately that's how it is. Like, he just looked at her as another notch on his belt, much like Waystar. And, he's just like, well, if the situation allows, I would do it, and watching him speak about her in that way, like, honestly, Shiv never really stood a chance in Logan's world. Before Shiv goes off to speak with Roman, she calls Tom, and this conversation with Tom is the most vulnerable she's been the entire season. And Tom at this point is open to the idea of separating from Shiv, right? He's like, can we just make this peaceful and just like, I'm not trying to fight with you anymore. But to his surprise, Shiv opens a door. She's opening up the possibility of starting over. And she says something interesting. Once you've said and done the worst things, you're kind of free. Basically saying we can only go up from here. And she's offering a fresh start, right? A real relationship. Basically, I think she's offering him a partnership, right? She's tired of this tit for tat thing. And it seemed like she was willing to start fresh. And Tom did not give her the response that she wanted, right? He's like, girl, I'm not sure. You really put me through a lot, and I got to worry about myself. And so, because she didn't get the response that she wanted, she kind of shut down. Tom is so scared at the start of this episode. He never imagined that he would be CEO by the end, right? He is worried. He doesn't know if he's going to be fired. And the thing that makes Tom, the thing that secured it for Tom is Tom always knew who to stay loyal to, right? He's always known who to back, right? He backed Logan because Logan has a history of winning. He had an opportunity to pitch himself to Lucas, so he did. And Tom and Greg are a great contrast because Greg is basically the poor man's Tom. Like, I have never seen someone so close to the finish line. He was moments away from being untouchable. He could have had it all. Tom had his back. He was like, we're going to be okay. Just keep your mouth shut. And Greg couldn't do it, right? Greg just, out of all this he's eaten, out of all the things that he was willing to do, right? It was all for nothing, right? Like, he just gets shot back to the bottom. And Tom, on the other hand, has taken a lot, but it was for something because he becomes CEO. So watching Greg's fall was absolutely spectacular, right? Like, I was just like, I couldn't believe my eyes. Before all hell breaks loose, the siblings rally for the first time in Barbados, I believe, at their mother's country home. And side note, I believe their mother is far worse than Logan, right? She is just soulless, in my opinion, right? Like, she just, it seems to me that she comes from a good background. And Logan may have married her for her DNA, right? It seems like Logan may have married above his class with this woman. And after their divorce, like, I don't know, she keeps living this lifestyle that she wants to live. And Logan got custody of the kids. Like, watching this woman's kind of indifference and, taking care of Roman, quote unquote, like, to me, this woman is terrible. Like, she is just awful. Her husband is a scammer. There was just a lot going on. So once they get there, things are tense because basically they're all wondering what Roman is gonna do. And Roman just looked like a kid, right? Like, he looked like his clothes, he looked a mess. Like, he looked like he'd been up all night. Ken looks like Logan, which tripped me out. Like, he is suited up. He looks like he's ready to become CEO tomorrow. And Shiv is just gloating, right? She's like, listen, I'm so sorry that you had to come all the way here for nothing, right? Like, she's saying, I would love it if you would all just be happy for me. And, you know, Shiv is basically saying, you guys need to admit that it's over, right? Like, if the tables were turned, they would have been gloating too, right? And she made it clear. She's like, listen, I would have loved to work with you guys, but you guys shut me out. And you left me no choice but to do this. This whole thing about winning, you know, this is essentially the problem, right? Like, Logan has kind of pinned them against each other their whole life. When you have a winner, you have a loser. And that's why they're not really able to work together, right? Like, outside of Waystar, they're able to work together, right? With the 100, they were able to work together. With Pierce, they were able to work together. But as soon as they enter Logan's world, like, the dynamics are different, right? Like, this is not an environment to be working together, right? Like, somebody's in charge and there are people under them, right? That's kind of the culture he's created. So unless you take yourself out of it, that's just how it's going to be. And unfortunately for them to repair their relationship, they need to get out completely. You know, they need to take the money, get out, do what they were supposed to do, which is either start their own company or buy one and just start over, right? But their egos won't let them. So the moment that everything changes is when Greg gives Kendall a phone call basically saying that Shiv will not be CEO. And Greg just messed it up. You know, he had one job, and that was to keep quiet, right? And he just put all his eggs in this basket, and Greg has been feeling overconfident, right? He hasn't been Gregging like he normally does, right? And Tom expressed some frustration. He's like, Greg, I need eyes and ears everywhere. What is Ebba doing? What are these people doing? And, you know, Greg was like, listen, Lucas likes me. Like, he's playing too many sides, right? And Greg, you got to know who to be loyal to, right? And unfortunately, like, you know, Greg just shot himself in the foot with that phone call. And as soon as he told Ken, I knew it was over. Like, I just had a feeling. I'm like, Greg, this is going to come back to bite you. This news changes everything, right? They tell Shiv, and Shiv starts to panic, right? She really thought she was going to become CEO. And I thought it was really telling that Lucas didn't pick up the phone. She calls him a few times, and he totally ghosts her because he's doing other interviews, right? And she just cannot get a hold of him. And then she sees this draft, and she's not listed as CEO, right? Lucas never actually told her that she will be CEO. He never asked her that, right? And I think it's starting to dawn on her like she was played. Maybe some part of her knew that she was being played, but not so soon, right? You would think that he would at least have the decency to tell her to her face that you're not going to be CEO. But the fact that he was going to tell her in the meeting and present Tom, like, I think that just added a level of anger to the situation that allowed Ken to kind of make his case. Fortunately, at this point, they need to decide, right? Do they take the money and run, or do they unite under one banner and try to take this company? And also, what is their reason for doing so, right? And right now, that banner is Ken, unfortunately. I think Ken had a golden opportunity to pitch himself here, but he failed. This and the waiter at the end. Like, there's two instances where he totally lost them, and this was one of them. And they kind of go back and forth, right? And they're like, Dad promised me this, Dad promised me that. And this is the part where we see a big difference between Ken and his siblings, right? Shiv and Roman understand that their father would have said and done anything to keep power, right? Like, his promises were empty. Like, he promised them whatever to get them to do anything. But Ken, on the other hand, Ken feels like this is his birthright, right? Apparently, his father told him when he was a very young child, he promised him the company. And that's a horrible thing to do to a young child, because that kind of just warped his brain, right? So since he was a young child, he's really felt like this is his destiny. And if he doesn't achieve this, then he has failed. And what makes Kendall interesting to me is that out of all his siblings, he's the only one that feels that not only can he live up to his father's expectations, he can surpass them. You know, he can build something bigger, something better if given the chance, right? He just needs to get to that seat. And this kind of ego and this kind of self-delusion is what really alarms Shiv and Roman. And so hesitantly, they appoint him CEO, but they're not happy with it. And just before they appoint him, they have this private conversation and they joke about killing Ken. And little do they know that they actually do kill Ken, right, with this vote. And this is the last time we see Ken happy, right? He is appointed, it's official, and he is smiling ear to ear, like he couldn't believe his luck. And then they kind of, you know, they're all together. And I really felt that whatever was going to happen after this, even if Ken didn't become CEO, they would still be together. You know, like they really felt unified at the end of this. So I was like, I don't know how this is going to go wrong, but they seem like they're good. And they go to the kitchen like kids, you know, like making all this noise to make Ken a meal, you know, fit for a king. And this scene was so perfect, right? Like, again, they actually do feel like siblings for once. And looking back, the moment that kind of foreshadowed all this is when just before he drinks this nasty mix of whatever they put in there, Shiv spits in his drink, and then Roman pours it over his head, as if to say, like, you know, we're about to all over your dreams, right? Like, looking back, I'm like, oh no, that was never a good sign, you know. But Ken was feeling confident. You know, they leave their mother's house. They feel together, they feel unified, they look good, they're making calls, they're securing votes. Like, they're actually working very well together, right? There's like a skip in their step. Everything starts to fall apart when they go to Logan's house, right? So it seems like they were invited over by Connor and Willa because they want to get rid of Logan's stuff. And a side note, I guess there's some issues with Connor and Willa, right? Like, Willa looked like she couldn't wait to get rid of Connor, right? This long distance thing. Like, I'm not sure what sparked it because of, you know, if Jared doesn't win, Willa did not look too happy about the idea of being stuck with Connor. So it seemed like all was not well in paradise. But whatever the case, if you watch the scene, you know, they're sitting side by side, they're joking. They actually do feel like an alliance. And the moment that I thought would really solidify it is this video of their father having dinner. And this was really sad because they actually haven't seen their father, right, before Italy. Like, as I understand, like, they were estranged. So they haven't been in his house for dinner for a very long time. So watching him, you know, it brought back memories. You know, they're like kind of remembering all the things that he used to do. And this felt very natural. You know, and I think it's really interesting. Their father brought them together, but he's also the thing that tears them apart. You know, and that's the toxicity of Waystar, right? And there's a wonderful scene and they put their hands on each other. And this is the most connected they felt since episode 3, since Logan's death, right? And they're laughing and they're just having a good time. And Roman is in love with Jerry. Like, he was looking at her like, I miss you, girl. Like, maybe he's gonna call her at the end of the episode, I don't know. But that was like their last moment of peace. And I couldn't believe how everything just fell apart. And so the beginning of the end came when Shiv and Tom began talking, and Shiv basically informs Tom, like, listen, I guess I'm not going to be CEO. And Tom was shocked. He's like, girl, how did you know? And she's like, Greg. And as soon as Tom heard Greg, his face dropped. He's like, you don't say. Like, he looked like that was it. You know, he looked like he was dead to him in that moment, right? And, you know, Tom has no choice but to confess. And I thought Shiv's reaction was really interesting because if the tables were turned, she would do the same thing, right? And Tom calls her out on it. He's like, listen, I'm not going to make you feel better about this. Like, if the tables were turned, you were trying to do the same thing. Like, why are you mad? You know, like, what are you angry about? And I think the thing that is scaring Tom is hours away from securing his job, right? And Greg just killed his momentum, right? He's given them something. You know, now Shiv has a chance to fight back and his job is no longer secure. And Shiv is so angry, and this is her chance to get Tom back, right? She's very angry about Italy. She kept saying, you know, Tom, you betrayed me. And this was the golden opportunity to get him back, right? But she is at a crossroads. Is it worth getting him back at the expense of severing this relationship forever? Because if she votes for Ken, she's basically finalizing her divorce. And for a while there, it seemed possible. Like, I died when Kendall, or when Roman was like the dry cleaner, like basically saying, how is it that empty suit even came through? And so just before we get to this crazy board meeting, like when this scene between Greg and Tom was so intense, right? Because Greg actually is pretty tall. Like, he hovers over Tom. And when Greg slapped Tom back, I actually gasped. I was like, no. Like, that's when you knew it was over. You know, Greg was fighting back, you know, like and Tom couldn't believe it. He's like, as if my dog just bit me, right? And that was the moment where their relationship is severed, right? Greg doesn't try to explain himself. He doesn't try to plead. He's just like, basically at this point, his eggs are in Ken's basket. So he has to pray for the best, right? And that was insane. So just before this board meeting, if you watch the way Ken, Roman, and Shiv walked into that office, they were so confident. They had their heads held high. They looked like a team, right? I was like, teamwork does make the dream work. And I think things started to unravel when Ken sits in Logan's chair. And at first, Ken was pretty chill about it. Like, he was like, and they're like, yeah, go ahead. And then he really gets comfortable. Like, he starts putting his feet up. He starts kicking it. And I think, again, the way that Logan kind of structured everything is, you know, the idea that they're working under Ken, like, they just looked unsettled, right? It did not sit right with them that he was sitting in this chair. And it also didn't sit right with them that they were rallying votes for this man, right? And you see that with Roman's breakdown. Like, that scene with Roman when he was like, why isn't it me? Basically, he's saying, what makes you better than me? You know, like, I don't see it. And this scene with Roman is really devastating because he's at rock bottom at this point. And the thing about being CEO, it's not just visual, right? It's not just in this family, like, this position has many connotations, right? It means their father loved this person the best. It means out of all three of them, he is the best one, right? He ranks above them. Like, it's not just an appearance thing, right? Like, Ken being CEO basically solidifies that he's better than them. You know, that he is their father's heir. And after all the things they've been through to try to get to that position, that's just not something that sits right with them, right? And I think at that point they kind of realized, like, I'd rather see Lucas there than any one of us there. You know, like, they just couldn't bear the sight of any one of them being above the other. And the way that Ken consoles Roman, it's like he was resorting to his father's tactics. Like, I think he bit him. I don't know what he did, but he opened his stitches somehow. Because Roman responds to pain, right? Like, he's someone that can be kind of subdued properly. And he knows that about Roman, right? And Roman, you know, crying, teamwork makes the dream work. Like, that's such a joke, right? Like, he knows that this is BS. There's no teamwork here, right? Like, they're basically making Ken's dreams come true. And just before this board meeting, you see Ken by himself in this room. And this is, imagine, like, the way he had a drink in his hand, he's alone, one head, one crown. He finally made it, and he's so happy. Like, he can't believe it. Like, he finally made it to the top. This is the moment that he's been waiting for. He can taste it. He can see the finish line. He can't believe it. You know, and all of that. He goes from being on the top floor, big man's office, to leaving that building never to be seen again. And so we get to this boardroom meeting, and, you know, this is tense. People are waiting to secure their golden parachute, right? They need this vote to come through so they can take their check and get out. Like, they are not trying to run this company anymore. Like, they're done. And Shiv, you know, she looked nervous right from the start. And I think she was hoping that Roman would say no first. And Ken's mistake is that he led the vote too soon, right? Frank is shocked. He's like, you don't want to talk about this? You know, and Ken is like, no, this deal is nonsense. You're going to have to fire me. Let's get to these votes. Like, he's so hungry for it. He could see it. There's no margin for error, right? He got it. The minute that Shiv was like, I need a minute, I think this is the moment that Ken lost it, right? I think had he given Shiv a minute, she might have actually come around. But the more that Ken talked, the worse he sounded. You know, like when he said, I am the eldest boy, like his entitlement, like I laughed with Shiv. I said, sir, what do you mean? You know, like he goes from basically being like, I deserve this, to like, if you don't give this to me, I'm going to kill myself. To, like, he was just a roller coaster of emotions. And the moment that he lost it was when he lied about being a killer. You know, it's one thing to be a killer. It's another thing to lie about it. And if he lied about that, it's like, what else is he willing to lie about? You know, like he's promising them all these things like this. This confession is what actually brought them together. So if this is premised on a lie, then this whole thing is premised on a lie. He was better off just confessing, you know, and his lie came back to haunt him. And this was the moment where Ken had the opportunity to just let it all shine, good or bad. And he was just fake, you know, he lied. And he was willing to, he basically exposed himself as being a guy who just didn't care. And once he exposed himself, all bets were off, right? And when Roman basically, I didn't know that Ken's son was not his biological son. But Roman went in on him. And the way he went in on him was interesting. He's like, I'm just saying what Dad would have said. Basically being like, listen, if we're going off the Dad playbook, like, I'm going in. And all lines were crossed. Like, there were no limits, right? And that was massive because basically, you know, Ken crossed a massive line by lying. And so Roman crossed it right back. You know, he was like, well, if that's what we're doing, then I guess that's what we're doing. And then watching Ken's desperation, like he literally resorted to violence at the end. Like literally pinning Roman against the wall, blocking Shiv. I was like, sir, like I was literally in shock. You know, and the thing with Ken is that, you know, he can't take accountability. And that's really the issue. And his father said it, you're not a killer. You know, like his father is the one who keeps getting him out of things, but Kendall is just, he does all these horrible things, but he can't take accountability for them. And if you can't, you know, this was the moment to just be real, and he couldn't do it. Right? And that's when Shiv said, I'm done. And watching the hope flush from Ken's eyes, like he still had some gas in the tank. Right? He was like, we can still get Frank. I was dying. And even Roman was like, STFU, like we are BS. This company is BS. She's BS. Basically saying we're not serious people. Dad was right. Take the money and go. You know, that's it. And that is the last we see of Ken in the Waystar building, and he was devastated. And watching everybody around them just so happy that they got this massive payout. Again, this was supposed to be a happy day, right? The original plan was to sell the company, take this money, and go start your own company. You know, go make your own pile. But that is not what Ken had in mind. And out of all the kids, out of all three of them, Ken is the only one with ambition. It was never about the money. For him, it was about the power. And this power, and I think this is true with all of them, you know, they kind of equate power with love, right? As if to say, if I become CEO, it means my father loves me. It means I'm good enough. It means I'm worthy. And so Ken's entire self-worth is directly tied into becoming CEO. When he's not CEO anymore, he feels worthless. He feels like he's not worth anything. And Tom comes in and takes over, right? It's a new era. They sign the paperwork and it's done. And watching Tom pin that like little sticker on Greg's forehead, I laughed. Because Greg did really F it up, right? And Tom made it clear. He's like, listen, we rise together, we fall together. You know, and the fact that I think what hurt Tom the most is he really felt like he was in it with Greg. And Greg, at the end of the day, he went for the family. As if to say, like, you know, the sense of entitlement with the kids rubbed off on Greg. I think he felt also that it was his birthright. And that, you know, he was flying too close to the sun. And watching Tom just kind of reap the rewards of all the, you know, that he's had to eat, You know, this man went from being in jail to being fired to being CEO, and he plays it well. You know, he's like, let's celebrate. You know, he knows how to kiss ass. Let's just say that. And at the end of this episode, all three of them go their separate ways. They're not together anymore, and they never will be. You know, and that's really sad. And the only person who I think will be all right will be Roman. Like, when I was watching him, he took, you know, ordering that martini. I thought he was going to call Jerry, but he looked at peace. He looked happy. He looked like he understood that, you know what, at the end of the day, that place is not good for me. And that's the only way that he was ever going to find peace. Any of them were ever going to find peace. They had to realize that getting out of that company was the best thing for them. And so he just looks relieved. You know, he looks rich and relieved. Like, he can do whatever he wants. And he just looked like he had a weight lifted off of him. And we get to Ken. Actually, before we get to Ken, let's talk about Shiv and Tom. So that was so awkward. You know, Tom is like, you can meet me in the car. And I really felt like, you know, watching Shiv, the switch up is just jarring to me, because their dynamic has always been Tom trying to help Shiv. He knew about Lucas. He knew about everything. You know, and I think Tom was really smart in not telling Greg about Shiv and Lucas. You know, he knew what, that's the thing that made Tom really good, is that he knew what to keep close to his chest, right? He knew not to just trust anybody. And that's why he's sitting in that chair. He's sitting in that car. And I suspect history will repeat itself. I don't know how long their marriage will last, but it's a loveless one. You know, it's a totally loveless one. And it's, again, it didn't seem like two people who loved each other. It just seemed like two people who would be using each other for a long time to come. And then we get to Ken. Ken looked devastated. He was suicidal. He just, the way he was walking, his face, I was just shook. And even Colin, he was like, he was looking at him like, please don't jump off. And again, Ken's self-worth is very much tied into being CEO, right? And for him, power is love, right? And without it, he substituted real love. You know what I mean? Like, he has nothing. He doesn't have a wife. He doesn't see his kids. He has no family. He has no legacy. He has nothing. He was erased in minutes, in moments, and there's really nothing for him to come back from, right? He has no goal. Like, the thing with Ken is that he needs a goal. He needs something to chase, and now he has nothing to chase, right? He has nobody there to tell him what to do. Like, he's not, the thing with all these kids is they don't know how to carve a path of their own. You know, like, and Ken especially, right? He really doesn't know what to do with himself. Even when he was trying to find his own way, they were still trying to do something very similar, right? Like, buy Pierce, the 100. Like, they don't have ideas of their own, so he's totally paralyzed. And I honestly felt, watching him sitting on that bench, like, he was done. Like, I don't think he can emotionally come back from this. No amount of money is going to fill this void in his heart. And I think he's always had a voice in his head telling him, like, you know, you're not good enough, or, you know, like, he has this idea of himself, you know, in terms of, like, what he could have been. And he kind of realizes he will never be that. And the price he's had to pay is enormous. You know, he's sitting there and he's realizing he's become this man that he hates. And there's just no reason for it. You know, and that's his tragedy. You know, he flew right into that sun. You know, and it was a beautiful ending, and it was a very appropriate ending, because in the end, like, one way or another, your past does come back to haunt you. And Ken had a golden opportunity to just take accountability for it and move on. And because he was unable to do that, he was unable to convince his siblings that he could be CEO. You know, and the one time he had to tell the truth. That's all he needed to do. Overall, I thought it was a fantastic finale. The ending speaks volumes, because, you know, watching these three, the show has been very focused on these three. And the legacy that Logan has left behind, it's just created this foundation of, you know, competitiveness, this toxicity. Like, these are not things that they're able to just snap out of overnight. You know, as much as they want to work together, as much as they wanted to, you know, actually be siblings and have each other's backs, that's just not how they grew up. And although they've had moments of change, they never really do change, right? They always fall back into these patterns, because in the end, that's the lesson here. I think people don't change. You know, maybe they get more comfortable in terms of what they actually are, you know, but they don't fundamentally change. right? And I think their inability to come together just kind of shows that. And this has to do with Logan's, you know, growing up in that kind of environment. And so it was a great ending. You guys let me know what you think, and until next time.